A little bit of background. Feel free to reach out to us afterwards. Here's our contact information, and most of you are familiar with who we are and how to do so. But we would love to be able to chat with you further after this webinar and be able to have further conversation. But we have been saying from the very beginning of COVID that, and in full transparency, PPE in our minds was essential. The physical precautions that were needing to be taken into consideration are important, and all of the things that come in as a result of the virus was crucial. But we've been saying since about week 3 and 4 that we've been concerned about the emotional and psychological, as we've been calling it, PPE, that this conversation that we're having today hasn't been taking place. That the dialogue around workplace health, the emotional and psychological support for employees in the workforce isn't something that really has come to the forefront. And we're still seeing this significantly in terms of our interactions with leaders across so many different industries, educational environments, as well as in industry and businesses. And so what we're trying to do, and we're thankful for the Chamber, for Eugene and your staff bringing us into this space, is what we're trying to do is bring more people into this conversation. We don't necessarily want to be the center of that conversation, but we want all of you who are at the forefront of being in leadership to be able to start bringing people together to really bring about this sense of awareness that the impact that the virus, that this pandemic has had upon the human element has been extremely intense. And so we're going to delve into some of those practicalities today in how we can move forward.
Wow, the past year has been one of change. If there has ever been a time to study human behavior and the effect of change on us, I think this past year, hands down, has got to be one of the most fascinating. But what do we know about change? Well, we know that it is a normal part of life. It's going to happen to us. Life is not static, right? It's constantly moving. So that means that from one day to the next, there's always going to be change in our lives. And what comes out of change is truly transformation. So we are always different people going into the change than we are coming out of the change. One of the reasons that, when we talk to people and we ask them, what is it about change that you don't like? And it's usually a couple things that come back to us. It's that they don't like that there's uncertainty in it, right? So even good change, I'm often intrigued when you hear of like a new couple that is getting ready to get married and they both made the decision to bring their lives together. But, you ask them, tell us, what do you feel? And oftentimes there's that little level of, nervousness because once again, it's a change. Their life is going to change. So we recognize that through change, there's messiness. And that's what life is really about. It's about messy, unpredictable things that take away our sense of stability. And for most of us, when we know that we have a change coming up, it scares us. So when we think about what has happened over the past year, we've had COVID, we've had social justice unrest, we've had partisan divide, we've had all of these things circling around us, and every single one of those things has brought about an element of change in all of our lives. So there is not a one of us that has not been impacted by this change.
And before we get too far into this, we did forget to tell you too, is this really is about you. It's not about just a lecture and presentation. So if there's points of dialogue, since we have a small enough group this morning, We've created a lot of space for that engagement with you. So feel free to jump in as you see fit. If there's questions, things that you want to challenge, or other observations. So we're going to play a little bit of Family Feud. And as we think about, based upon the framework and the platform that Lisa has already established for us in terms of the systematic experience of change and the impact that it has upon us therein, one of the things that we often ask in the midst of change is, even though there are environmental factors that we have no control of, we're constantly, through our coaching and training and working with organizations, helping to impress upon people what are the things that we do have control over. So jump in at this particular time and feel free to offer your insights and or opinions on what you think we have the ability to have control over.
Our reactions?
Yep.
Yep.
There you go. Keep going.
Attitude,
Excellent. What was that?
our attitude,
Attitude?
Our process, what we do next with that.
Excellent.
Mindset. Thanks, Dan.
What we eat
Excellent.
It's good.
sometimes.
Who cuts our hair?
Your hair? Is that what you said?
Who cuts our hair?
Oh, okay. Who cuts our hair? Yes, okay.
That was a cheap shot, Paul. Thanks. Nice. Anything else? All right, so through the lens that we look through, here are, and many of you actually in one way or another made mention of these 7 dynamics. So these are the things when we're working with organizations and individuals that we recognize we have the ability to control. So breathing through the stress is as touchy-feely as that is, one of those things that we do have control over is the ability to breathe and to really think about how we're able to process that stress. Self-talk is more than just the words that we're saying, but the ideas and the beliefs that we're adopting internally. A sense of gratitude. Gratitude is one of those things, and Lisa's been amazing in helping me to have gratitude in my life, because and I just had a conversation with a really good couple of friends of mine who are more advanced in their years, and we talked about some of the natural challenges that we experience in life. Those are normal, and it's always challenging to balance the yin and the yang of acknowledging the pain and the challenge and the struggle of life, but at the same time not staying there so that we're not victims. Body language, how we hold ourselves, especially in the midst of not only conflict, but also being conscious of how we're carrying ourselves physically when life is getting challenging. Jean, you talked about diet, the things that we're taking in, sleep, which is sometimes a commodity, and then of course our mental and physical fitness.
So with the situation that we all find ourselves in from a business standpoint, looking at these 7 items, some of the things that you all can do as business leaders to be mindful of what you see on this screen here. Take something like gratitude. Now more than ever is a time for leaders to be expressing gratitude about what your team is doing in the midst of having to operate remotely, having to operate via, this virtual platform, and just the awkwardness that brings in. Make sure that the gratitude that you are expressing is very sincere. So we don't want to be handing out platitudes that really are just light and fluffy. We want to make sure that we are really being sincere with the things that you are grateful for relative to your coworkers, to your leadership team. You know, it works both ways. Relationships are reciprocal. And typically we're expecting our leaders to be expressing gratitude to the team that reports to them. But we also want to make sure that the team realizes that the leaders need to hear that they are grateful for how they're leading right now. Leaders are having to lead and make decisions in situations that they've never had to act in before. So make sure that there's a level of acknowledgement of that, hey, you had to get us up and running, you know, virtually in a matter of a couple weeks here. Body language now, because we're working remotely, makes that very hard. So what that means for you all is that you've got to do a little extra private detective work, if you will. And that might mean picking up the phone and having a one-on-one conversation with someone that maybe you are concerned with in the office, doing a check-in. Hey, are you okay? Because body language tells us a lot, but when most of us are just seeing each other from the neck up, we really can't read into that. Another thing to make sure that you are checking in on your employee base and your coworkers is asking them how they are feeling. So awareness is everything. And, you know, we always want to take each other at face value. So our screen lights up this morning and we see you all sitting in these boxes and we see all these beautiful women and handsome men. And we can easily make the assumption that, wow, everyone's doing great. But peel away a few layers and I'd be willing to bet that a good portion of us are carrying worries in our heart about someone or something right now. So make sure that you are doing check-ins with people to ask them, how are you coping with everything? Is there anything that you need? How's your mental health? You know, that's one of the things we will ask people how you're feeling, but it's typically, how are you feeling physically, not emotionally? So make sure that you are not afraid to enter into the discussions on emotional health. Wonderful thing now is a lot of companies have programs in place where their employees can use counseling services. So please make sure if your organization has that in place, remind your employees this is available. It's there for your use. We recommend it. If you've used it yourself, you know, now's not a time to be prideful, you know, come out and identify, I've used it, it's helped me, blah, blah, blah.
So, and I do want to add, Lisa, if you don't mind, but through the context that we work through as professionals in working with organizations, it's through the lens of social emotional intelligence. And you, in and of as much said, is all of this stuff begins with self. So what we're trying to do is really create engaging, productive, and healthy work environments. But oftentimes what we think about in terms of that particular venture is through the things that we have to do for everybody else. And in order for that to happen, in order to create that healthy culture in an organization and a business, it has to start with us. And so that shift in our thinking, the way that we see ourselves, the language that we're using internally, needs to be manifested personally before we're starting to bring other people on board. So as we think about,
And actually one of them
What's that?
said response.
okay,
So,
perfect.
but
So we'll
still.
just skip over that.
No, talk on that a
Oh,
little
you
bit.
want to, okay.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's still good.
All right. All right. So I'm going to share a little bit of a story. The last couple of days, I have a 19-year-old who has severe autism. He was diagnosed when he was 2.5 or 18 months, I guess it was. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've been noticing that there's been a significant change and a response that has come from him behaviorally. And so naturally so, because he doesn't have expressive language to be able to say, you know, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious, I have this going on inside of myself. How he manifests that is oftentimes through his behaviors, which are oftentimes undesirable. And so one of the things that we acknowledge as parents who have children with unique and special needs, both Lisa and I, is that the greatest asset and gift that we can give to the health of our children, and most importantly to ourselves, is putting ourselves into the driver's seat. Lisa uses this language all the time. So what we want to do is be in a place in which we're not reacting, but we're making decisions to respond. And so as we go back to this particular list, all of these 7 things, including thinking about how we respond to the environment around us, really dictates the results and the response that we'll receive back. And so think about for yourself, again, going through that lens of it begins with self, and then we change culture based upon how we respond to those around us. Think about the mindset that you're carrying with you and how you're leading other people forward.
And we are once again living in, I would say, one of the most greatest times of a reactive based society. So, right, people have very strong opinions about a lot of things that are going on around us right now. So there's a lot of reaction coming out in people. So we need to be mindful of that, and we need to help model the behavior that we want. I mean, that's old school talk, but we talked to a business associate the other day, and we loved what he did. He talked about, I think it was sometime this summer, with everything that was going on, and just seeing a lot of just, unprofessional behaviors and language and just hateful rhetoric swirling around. He came out and addressed his employees and said, I understand there's a lot of stuff going on that is out of our control right now, but I want you to know that we will treat each other with respect and dignity and professionalism here at work. And it will start with me as the owner of the company. And it just, when he said that, I remember just getting chills up my spine, because I thought that's a strong leader, and that's putting a ton on his shoulders, because he's a human being too, right? And most certainly he's got things that are going to trigger him as he moves through his day, but it is up to him to model what he expects for the rest of his employees to follow. And that's what we're talking about. So there are a couple things when we talk about how do we teach organizations to thrive, not just survive right now at this time of life. And there's a couple things that can be done to check the internal health of your organization and the external and internal health. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the external health. And it's really, really important that as businesses, we do not stick our head in the sand and pretend that, all right, what has just happened in the last 13 months hasn't happened. We've got, once again, we've got a global pandemic, whether or not you believe it or not, where you're at on that, none of that matters. But what matters, once again, is the opinions that people are carrying, because people have these opinions. So we've got that swirling around us. We've got the whole issue on vaccination swirling around us. Some people are saying, I want it. Some people, no, you shouldn't do that. Same thing with the masks. All that is swirling around us. Then we have all of the stuff swirling around us relative to social justice issues. Black Lives Matters, LGBT issues are on the forefront. The partisan divide is probably the most extreme I've ever seen it in my entire life. So all of this stuff is just moving around us at a very rapid pace. And once again, the world that John and I live in is, we can't stick our head in the sand. We have to address this stuff, because even if it's not being talked about in your place of employment, we guarantee it's still being brought in with your employees. Every single employee that walks into that office, Monday through Friday, if you're meeting, in person, or if you're doing it virtually, every single one of us is being impacted. So we have to acknowledge this. So we've created a survey. A couple of you have seen this before, but it's kind of just a good little exercise to check the external stress of your employees and what they're dealing with right now. So the first part of this survey, it's got 4 parts
that we're going to walk you through. So you're going to be tabulating this as you go forward. So just go ahead and have something near you that you can just maybe write down on a piece of paper or otherwise.
So first part is the impact of COVID on your stress level. 7 questions. 1 is that you're experiencing no stress relative to that. 2 is medium stress. 3 is high stress. And then total your score of COVID after you're finished.
Does social impact reference the impact of being social or not being social, or okay?
Yeah,
Thank
so you want to get together with friends and you can't.
Yep,
Thank you.
excellent question.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to social issues here in just a minute. Is everybody good? Can we go forward? Okay. The second one is social justice issues. And so you can see a good representation of the number of different social justice issues that are at the forefront and how these have impacted any number of you. Okay, is everybody okay? All right. Political. How has the political environment impacted you personally?
And then part 4, this is just our catch-all of other. And then when you finish this, total up parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 together to see where you're at.
All right. So that being said, in a respectful and confidential and trusted fashion, we'd like to create an opportunity for you to be able to share a little bit of the impact in these particular areas that they've had upon you. Now, keep in mind too, again, as we've said in many different ways up to this point in time in the last half hour, is being conscious of the fact that not only are these impacting us, but as we're reflecting on these various areas and how they've impacted us, they're also impacting the environment of those around us and the relationships that we have, both personally as well as professionally, in our work environments and in our relationships. So which particular areas have caused you the greatest amount of stress? If you're willing to share, go ahead and just unmute yourself.
COVID.
Yeah. COVID.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about that? Why so?
Yeah, and I didn't realize that this is such a neat exercise to see where the bulk of our stress lies. But COVID, work from home, kids back and forth in school, myself and my kids all had it. So it was back and forth. And it's interesting because my stress is always thinking of, well, we had it, but we're fine. I'm employed, but it's stressful. So it's always like everyone else's stress is more. I shouldn't feel stressed because we're fine. So
Mhm.
it's a lot of conflict, I guess, internally.
You know, and Deneen, one of the things that we frequently say in many of the environments that we find ourselves in, we're preconditioned as human beings to deflect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of pride that goes into our lives as human beings. Is I'm fine, I'm okay, somebody else has it worse. Their situation is a little bit more difficult or challenging. But being mindful of the fact, first and foremost, as we look internally for each and every one of us, is that our reality is our reality. And so moving into a space that is healthier, both psychological and emotionally, and then ultimately how that conveys into the environment around us and the relationships that we have is really dependent upon owning our own reality and understanding what's happening internally. Others.
John and Lisa, hi, good morning,
Hi.
everyone. For me, exercise also was very interesting, and I guess as I'm, getting older, and I didn't really realize how the political
Mhm.
really affected me, and a lot of the people that I hang out with outside of work are really involved in the political locally and nationally, and they really follow it, and I didn't realize how much. And some of them have really different viewpoints than I have, and trying to figure out how to not be combative because our beliefs are so far away. Like, how can they believe that? How can they be reading that? How can they believe that statement? It's like the old on social media that you put on here, like, Abe Lincoln said this on social media, right? Do you believe it?
Yeah.
And I really find myself daily, like, even internally with our team, sometimes we have some opposing political views, and it didn't bother me when I was younger, but as I'm getting older, I'm like, maybe I do really need to speak up and talk about my views and share. And then I'm like, no, that's not really the right place and the right opportunity. But then later on at night, I kind of have to think about it and try to, let it go and move forward. So
Excellent.
that was really a wild thing to think about here today, this morning.
Darren, go ahead. Please.
No, thank you for saying that. There's, once again, this is just such a fascinating time, I think, for us all to just step back and observe what has been happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
But think about when we're children, there's two things that we're all told you should never talk about when you're in company that you're not really sure what their beliefs are: politics and religion, right? So that has done a tremendous disservice to all of us because we were never taught how to discuss hotbed issues. And so, that's why we believe there's a lot of just this nastiness swirling around all of us, because we haven't been taught how to discuss issues that have an impact on all of us from a lens of being socially and emotionally intelligent, to be able to say that, you know what, Darren, you and I were friends, for 20 years, and I've just found out that you have totally different political beliefs than I am, and all of a sudden I can't be your friend anymore. We've got to go back to the thread of what connected us originally for that
Excellent.
20 years. That's what we hang on to. And then we teach ourselves, all right, if we're going to talk about this other stuff, here's the ground rules for how we hold those discussions.
Thanks for your vulnerability too,
Yes.
Darren. We've done this exercise with a lot of people, and really, frankly speaking, you're one of the first that has actually stepped in and talked about politics. So thanks. And it's good to have you on
Yeah,
here.
you're welcome. Yeah,
as a,
it's-
yeah,
happy to be here. Thanks.
Yep. Others?
I scored the highest number of threes in the political column as well.
Oh, okay.
They were all threes for me. I think I'm using the word global, but I mean in our country, the political atmosphere in our country today is actually quite frightening to me. People can't have a civil conversation once they find out political differences. There's no middle ground on anything. It's my way or you're wrong. And that starts at the top in our political system right now.
Excellent.
And
Well,
it
Yeah.
kind of, like, the
Operating
thought
under
process I
pressure.
have is it kind of reminds me of, I was a kid in the 60s, but there was a lot of upheaval in the 60s with political stuff and racial stuff. And it kind of reminds me of that
hmm,
atmosphere a little bit.
excellent. Thank you, Paul. Very articulate.
Hi.
Patrick, go ahead.
May I?
Yeah,
Yes.
Sorry.
I actually scored higher in the other category. And not just myself, but those closest to me. Relationships were tested during pandemic, the difference in beliefs, relationships as far as working while one is unemployed, and the shift in income, and all of a sudden the breadwinner is staying home and the other one may have two jobs. So I actually scored higher in there because our household took a huge hit. Luckily our children are older, so the schooling worked itself out. But yeah, that's the one where I scored the highest. And personal relationships, I have family members that aren't speaking to each other. Holidays weren't the same this year. You know, it all rolls over into everything. So
Sorry to hear all of that, Jenna. That's
You know,
a lot.
it's essentially the perfect storm in 2020. You know, you've got
Yep.
this political structure that is really operating under two truths, and there's no way to convince the other side of that your truth is the actual truth. Even if you present facts these days, there's no convincing them that they're wrong and what they believed in and heard and really based their decisions around is absolutely false. And you know, I've lost a lot of very intelligent friends over the course of the last 12 months because I can't even have a conversation with them because it always comes around to their political belief and you know, the fact that the world's out to get them, you know, thinking that the global pandemic is out to get one political party in the United States it blows my mind that people can think that that was the case, that China did this just to hurt the American Republican Party. And I don't want to say too much about it, but that, you know, that's obviously stressful. And then Jenna talked about the internal stuff in a household and within a family, and then Deneen also mentioned how school and regulations have really upheaved all of our lives, and it's frustrating. You know, I talked to a lot of school districts, and in the private sector, they're back full time. So then that leaves me wondering why am I in my basement right now? Because my daughter's upstairs on Zooms. Why isn't she back in school? And obviously it stresses me out. So, you know, I started off these lists with small numbers, but then once you get down, you're like, oh yeah, that's a 3, 3, 3. And then you realize, okay, so this is why the stress piles up. So
Yes.
it's been a rough year for conversations
Yes.
with who I thought were intelligent people, and then come to find out they've been duped into this mess that we're currently living with. So
Thank you for sharing, Patrick. And this is exactly what we're talking about. This is the stuff that a lot of it that we can't see, right? I mean, as you're all sharing, I mean, my heart hurts. Paul, as I'm hearing you saying you scored all threes, I know, John and I both know what that level of stress feels like and what it does to someone.
Yeah.
So we all have, I'm sure, you know, either areas within that survey that possibly were many threes, or people that we know and love that are experiencing that. So it's again, it's the mindfulness of realizing that everyone is walking around with something. The majority of it we can't see, but we have to be willing to be aware first and foremost of what am I feeling, so that I can understand then someone else is probably feeling something possibly similar. There's a duck in here.
Well, that lightened up the mood. Whoever thanks for that. The question.
I am so sorry.
That's so
Who was-
funny.
That's awesome, Heidi. I love
loved
it. Yeah,
Drew, you
go
have
ahead,
a-
Drew.
Yeah, a couple things. I had kind of an interesting result on this exercise. It was in the first category where I had the most. I used 1 as my baseline, and it was in the first category that I had the most items that were not ones.
Okay.
However, it was in the third category that I had the most threes. So even though I came in under that 40 threshold, that's not to imply that simply because there hasn't been a whole lot of stress that there aren't items
Yes.
that are still, causing a disruption.
Absolutely.
And even though there's maybe like this underlying higher level of stress in the one category, the spikes are in another one, altogether. The second thing was, I'm a perfect example for what you're describing or what you were talking about with the items that we're not supposed to discuss. Because as soon as we went into this political discussion,
Mhm.
my palms start getting a little bit
Yeah.
sweaty, the red flags internally start
Yeah.
going up a little bit. And I'm like, you know what? I am just gonna let this go, because I've had situations similar to what Paul described and similar to what Patrick described.
Yeah.
And I've also lost friends, and in some cases I was the one that made the decision to do that. And I've told longtime friends, 30-year people that I went to college with, we ain't gonna discuss this. I mean, there's no ground rules. We're just not going to do it. So, and I never went into the why. I never went into the or else this could happen.
Yeah.
But so that's something that I've also had to kind of accomplish. And if I see it on Facebook, the comment is here. It's not typed out, and I just move on, because
Okay.
I don't have time for this.
No, and you nailed it. It used to be a respond to those, make a comment, but after you get that brick wall in your face so many times, and I can remember, back in 2015, 2014, being on Facebook and posting pictures of family and dogs and meals. Where did that go? Where is that gone? We've completely lost the social aspect of social media, and
Yes.
we've turned into this argue about everything, and it's not always political. It's about so one of my groups is Waterford Everything. So when someone posts
yeah.
about a restaurant,
Yes.
Yeah.
and then it's 50% of the people are don't ever eat there, and 50% of the people are, oh, I love the food. So I don't know what we've done to ourselves, but maybe we just need to
In interest
have a
and
big hug.
in interest of time, though, and Drew, I want to go back real quickly to what you said, is being conscious of what you were feeling with, oh crap, here we go, of this is what's going on. So just real quickly, we do have 10 minutes left, and we want to be mindful of that. But just use this as a gauge for not only personal, but now as business leaders, as organizational leaders, of how we move through this to be able to create healthy work environments without completely dismissing this entire discussion.
So what's the threshold number that the overall total score to where we need to start drinking.
Well, that's another conversation.
That's another seminar.
Yeah.
That is
12
called
o'clock.
Happy Hour.
Well,
Yeah. So as Lisa has talked about, is just being cognizant of the fact that we are in a space, if we're actually going to be intentional about creating healthy work environments, healthy businesses, and healthy organizations, there's no other option but to walk through that door, and doing that in a very strategic, thoughtful, and intentional fashion.
Communication is one of the things that, coming out of this, there's been a lot of really good lessons learned about how a business should operate to create health, and once again, to really, really thrive. So if you are communicating with your staff, now's the time to up the frequency of your communication. More is always better at this point in time. We want to make sure that it's truthful and it's transparent. So, for example, we had an HR director that we were interviewing a couple weeks ago, and if we could model how a business should operate, or we wish could have operated during this whole pandemic, it would be them, because she would correspond with the company and say, hey, just checking in with everyone to let you know that we have nothing new to report this week, but just wanted to make sure that everyone's okay. So it's that level of transparency that I might not have anything new or good or different to tell you right now, but they're still hearing from her, and she's not, operating in a vacuum. We also want to make sure that your correspondence, when you're speaking, whether or not it's face-to-face, whether or not it's written correspondence, whether or not it's in this platform, make sure that you are leading with two key things: care and empathy. Now more than ever, those are so desperately needed. Just as we are hearing the stories unfolding, as you were sharing with the results of your survey, those of you that have had relationships that have broken down, that have family members that aren't talking, that stuff hurts. So please, we want to make sure that we are leading with gifts of grace and compassion and just kindness. We need that now more than ever. Okay. So as we move forward, there's a couple critical things that we would hope your organization would have in place. One is a crisis management team. So a lot of organizations were really quick to realize the benefit of having this in place. But it shouldn't take a pandemic to realize, unfortunately, we learn things the hard way, and that's okay. But having a team that can be your point people for the organization to determine, what's the frequency of our correspondence going to be, who's that going to come from, who can be representatives in the organization, that if employees are really, going through something difficult, they can talk to them. So we want to make sure that that team is established, that the rollout of who that team is to the organization is done on a regular basis, so that people can't say, well, oh my gosh, I didn't even know we had a crisis management team, not to mention, I don't even know who's on it. So having those in place will help. Also making sure, and this kind of touches on what I mentioned before, making sure that you are checking in with the physical and mental well-being of your staff and your leadership team. Mm-hmm. And lastly, making certain that, for example, if your organization is still working from home, which is fine, do you all have the resources that you really need to do your job effectively from home? What we're trying to do now is drive down stress and anxiety. And the way we do that is we have our options are plentiful for how we work around and navigate challenges.
What we're really talking to this issue with is, as most businesses have a crisis management team in place for physical PPE, we're continuing to reinforce the conversation of there needs to be the dynamic around that emotional and psychological and social PPE that needs to be put into place. So as we really move forward together as leaders and as organizations, it's important to be able to go back and ask the question in a very reflective fashion, through our ability to create space with the realization that we're living in unprecedented times, is that first and foremost, we're extending a sense of grace and compassion to ourselves, being willing to create an environment where there's conversation and dialogue so that we can assess what things have we done right, where have we missed the mark, what places do we need to amp up our support for our work environment. So really creating an environment where we're all getting on the same page with that.
What comes out of all of this is that a connection can be built in a way that it couldn't have been built before. So we are all going through this crisis together, even though we acknowledge that for each and every one of us, it's going to be experienced differently because we have different dynamics that are going on in our personal lives that change how we experience it. But the fact remains that we are all experiencing this together. So that is a connection. So we can help by meeting each other where we're at, by acknowledging that, hey, you might be an anti-vaxxer and I'm a vaxxer. That's okay. You need to do what you need to do for your family, and I need to do what I need to do for my family. That's what we're talking about. And then also the other way that we can really build connection in our organization is check-ins. So we would recommend that these become a regular part of your staff meetings, and it doesn't have to be anything really long, but carving out, 10, 15 minutes of a meeting to say, we're going to run around the circle here and we're going to do a check-in. And I know sometimes in the business world, this can be really hard because we're sometimes more guarded about being vulnerable and expressing if we're having a difficult time. But one of the things that we do that works often really well is you pull out a feelings chart, and it'll have, feelings from happy to angry and everything in between. And you pass that chart around and you say, all right, everyone pick a feeling and tell us why you're feeling that. So that's a good kind of icebreaker to start. So connection benefits. We see that productivity always is ramped up when people feel like they are seen, as a well-rounded, human being more than just the title they carry. We know that it allows them to be more engaged in their company. They're definitely a much more loyal employee, and it always impacts the bottom line from a profitability standpoint.
So we wanted to close, and we know that we're at the end of our time with you all. Are there any comments or questions that you have or observations that you'd like to make as we bring this time to an end?
I think Paul had something to say, but I just want to say thanks for bringing awareness to all of us, and it's really worth the time and effort to sit in and get your ideas and thoughts on where we're all at. So thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a really good exercise. Sometimes just even being aware of where your stress is coming from. Obviously,
Yeah.
I know I'm stressed out, but being able to pin it down and really after looking at the list, I can, I can steer myself away from having the political conversations or having the the difficult stuff that's going to escalate that stress. I tell myself every morning, you know, stay off of social media all day and you're going to be fine. You don't have to worry about arguing with anybody. The problem is that, like Drew said, we don't get that out anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
So Drew's just like I am. I internalize it.
Yeah.
And now I'm in here arguing with myself all day about, you know,
Oh my God, Patrick.
yeah. So it's one of those situations where thank you for
Take care, Ashley.
the exercise. Today was beneficial. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
good. We're happy to
Yeah.
hear that.
Take care, Ashley. Good seeing you.
I
Anybody?
appreciate being able to focus on the areas of the stress. Because now I realize it's okay, and it starts with me as a leader to evaluate, okay, what are my core values and my integrity, and where am I getting my sense of peace? It's very insightful to be able to pinpoint where those stressors are coming from and have a mental red flag of, hey, stop it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Thank you. If, oh, yep, Ken?
It was very thought provoking. It's always nice to know that you're normal and not alone.
Yeah,
So thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
We're complex beings. We really are. And breaking it down into those parts and pieces is extremely important.
Anything that John and I can do for your organization from a training standpoint, CH Coaching and Training is here for you. Let us know. We'd love to connect with you. But stay well, everyone. Thank you for your time this morning, and especially your vulnerability with what you shared with us. We really appreciate it.